Greetings YouTube and welcome to the lounge. I want to thank Elm City for coming on Tuesday to hang out with us as we talked about a woman of color who's a gamer, her views on online fuckboys or misogyny, and the sector. I would love to have her on a hangout with me, her, Vuk, Curious, Force 100able, and Donnie Boom over at Food for Thought. We can shoot the shit and talk about black community politics. So again, I just want to thank Elm City for coming on Autonomist Dialogues. Moonlight. Moonlight was based on the play In Moonlight, Black Boys Look Blue by Terrell Alvin McRaney. Barry Jenkins' movie is a dark, realistic, but visually striking and transcendent coming-of-age film. I remember Barry Jenkins' first film, 2009's Medicine for Melancholy, a romantic comedy set in San Francisco about two African-American 20-somethings who have a brief relationship spanning a night and a day. The city of San Francisco in that movie and its politics of gentrification acted as both background and matchmaker between the couple. I suggest strongly that you find this movie and watch it. It is currently on Netflix. So in Moonlight, we have Miami in the 1980s. If some of you remember around that time, Arthur McDuffie, an African American, was beaten to death by 4 white police officers and they were acquitted. That ruling touched off the 1980 Miami riots. While the film does not necessarily refer to the actual event, you can almost see the aftermath of that political tension through the walls and the homes of the settings of this movie. But what we will definitely also see in the film is the onset of the crack epidemic of Miami's black neighborhoods, particularly Liberty City, where the main character, Sharon, grows up. We are introduced to Juan, played by Mahershala Ali. We all know him from his amazing portrayal of Cottonmouth on Netflix TV series Luke Cage. Juan is obviously a street boss who runs other drug dealers. While he wears a do-rag and has a laid-back vibe, we see a man who is intelligent and has made a path for himself that white supremacy and capitalism has left only for him. The crown on the top of the dashboard of Juan's car is an obvious symbol of his status on the streets, but is Juan comfortable with that crown? We will see that Juan is exactly the missing father the black diaspora is always in desperate need of. The father who one makes him to be. He is there to teach and to nurture, not to rule or be bridled by. There is a reason why I called my Luke Cage review Paternal Instinct, to counter the traditional idea of what a patriarch is and fatherhood has been. I see a lot of Juan in Pops, a street dude who, instead of exploiting a younger brother who is not necessarily his blood, takes him under his wing to protect and nurture. Juan, who I'm sure has had his share of fights and random moments of shooting down the street, befriends the main character, Sharon, after witnessing a group of bullies chasing Sharon into some abandoned apartments. At this point, I have to say that so much happens in the movie from these two characters meeting that it's hard to talk about without giving away the plot. So no matter how many spoiler warnings I give, I feel that I would ruin it because it's very rare to see a movie starring black people that allows for a great deal of complexity in its characters and storyline. So I will say this, the film is broken down in a typical 3-act structure, but the 3 acts consist of Sharon's childhood, adolescence, and then adulthood. Each act is titled by Sharon's identity of the time. Act 1, he is simply known as Little. Act 2, he is known as Sharon. And at the end, Act 3, he is known as Black. And identity is the key word here, as Sharon discovers things about himself and the world around him and how it shaped him. I did a video last year, and I can't believe I can now say that this channel is a year old. But the video is titled Black Other. While being the black other can be defined from anything ranging from exceptional intelligence, artistic ability, being empathetic, or extra sensitive or intuitive, even in sexual orientation, or just plain living in a different world from everyone else, It's really about how the rest of the black community just won't leave the black others the fuck alone to grow and be themselves. This is Sharon's main struggle until we think he is beaten into being what the world expects him to be. And the film itself does flip expectations of what we think it offers. So just please check this movie out. I know that it was a very abstract thing. I would go into plot and structure and what happens if it was any other film that I would simply just be talking about. This movie is not any other film. But I'm really trying to get you guys to go see it without telling you a lot. You gotta let the movie happen if it is still in your local theaters. Also, I need to say that besides all three actors who play Sharon, Little, played by Alex Hibbert, Sharon, played by Ashton Sanders, and Black, played by Trevante Rhodes, Janelle Monáe, and of course, Mahershala Ali, to me, the other show stealer was Naomi Harris, who played Paula, Sharon's mother, who falls to drug addiction. Now, she was the fucking leg. And you just have to see this movie, and I hope that not only Barry Jenkins gets to do another movie, shortly after the success of this film, we will see more from Moonlight cinematographer James Laxton, who has worked with Barry Jenkins on Medicine for Melancholy. Sapiosexuality, sapiophile, sapiosexual. The magazine Psychology Today's online page recognizes the term sapiosexual as a person who finds intelligence and the human mind to be the most sexually attractive feature in another person. The origin of the word comes from the word sapiens, which means wise or judicious, and the word sexual. Diana Robb, PhD, writes in a blog for Psychology Today that those who admit to being sapiosexual will say that they are turned on by the brain and tend to be teased or excited by the insights of another person. This means the person you are attracted to might have a tendency to have an incisive, inquisitive, and an irreverent mind. As foreplay, the sapiosexual person may crave philosophical, political, or psychological discussion because this turns them on. Although the attraction is not always connected to sexuality, it often is. Sometimes, however, platonic friendships between the sexes, of course, if we're talking about heterosexual people, but I'm pretty sure same-sex people are also dependent on sapiosexual desires. This intellectual synergy simply fires up the relationship. This is often seen in the workplace and may be viewed as another aspect of being sapiosexual, that is, a desire to be connected with intellectuals, although the outcome is not always an intimate encounter. When I first met my wife, she was interviewing me and a few others on why radicals consider the new President-elect Bill Clinton to be the new boss who was same as the old boss. Her questions were mainly aimed at me, and I was focused on her line of questions, which at times seemed almost hostile. I don't think she was a defender of Clinton, desperate to believe that anyone was better than Bush 1, but her questions thrown at me for her college newspaper at the time, mainly asking what the hell did radicals have to sell that could outmaneuver the Democrats, who always seem to be able to successfully use fear-mongering on women, LGBT, and poor working people and people of color. I came at her with the same old rhetoric from my earlier Marxist-Leninist days, mixed in with my then-current anarchist perspective. But she looked at me like I was speaking old Latin in the modern day. I told her that while it was easier getting people to see the radical left perspective under a right-wing administration, it was definitely a lot more harder under a liberal administration. And that at that point, what we will have to do is hope that there would be a complete breakdown of the system altogether, and people will see that it doesn't matter who is in office. The economic crisis will be brought down by the ruling class nonetheless, and people would rise up. She countered that wouldn't the ruling class just find yet another way to fool the people by using such desperate times? She pointed out as an example that perhaps a single ruling party would be formed, and an even more authoritarian armed enforcement body would be given unlimited power, and that they would get away with all this by finding some other group to scapegoat the way that Nazi Germany had done. Then she said, in the face of all of that, what would the radicals do to counter such a scenario? At that moment, I had nothing to argue against that. Later, in years, Naomi Klein would go on to write about the shock doctrine, how capitalism's ruling agents, the politicians, and the private sector would use disasters or other forms of crises to manipulate populations to embrace public policies that worked against their interests and further disempower them. But this young woman sitting across from me foresaw that shit like that can go down some 20-odd years before that book was published. My heart was racing. Pulse rate was all up. I was getting excited instead of being frustrated for not having a counter argument. Later, 2 weeks later, in the morning in my apartment, she said that she experienced the same thing on the day we met. I've always been attracted to intelligent, artistic, or witty women for as long as I can remember. Brains will always transcend any physical attraction I might have for someone. I think that humans could gradually evolve to be attracted to one another along the lines of intelligence, and we could focus more on how someone else can make us feel rather than if someone is easy on the eyes. But between our stubborn clawing at old beauty standards, perhaps rooted in our old unconscious animal selves, and how Madison Avenue programs us as to how we should value one another, we are still held back from moving forward as a humanitarian society valuing the beauty of our minds. This is the Garage Autonomist.